Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. And of course, I'm your host, Montel Williams, and today we're diving deep into a topic that's been on everybody's mind, cannabis legalization. We'll be discussing its past and present and what the future might hold. And to help us explore this complex subject, we have a very, very special guest. He's the co-chair of the Fox Rothschild Cannabis Law Practice, nationally ranked by Chambers USA as the leading lawyer in cannabis law, and recognized as a trailblazer by the National Law Journal. He leads a 70 attorney national team providing comprehensive legal services to businesses in the legalized cannabis sector. We're thrilled to have him with us today, so please welcome Mr. Bill Bogot. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Thank you, Montel. It's a real pleasure.
Oh, it's a real pleasure for me too, sir. I've seen some of your work, and I've read about you, and I'm just excited. I'm a little giddy because you're one of my heroes. So there is so much to unpack, Bill, when it comes to cannabis legalization. I want to start with kind of an overview of the cannabis law right now. But before you give me that, I want to talk a little bit about you. Give me a little bit more about your background. I mean, you had so many choices to pick from when it comes to be a lawyer and working in this space. I mean, your acumen is above and beyond reproach. You could have picked any other level and any other area of law to study, to practice in. Why did you pick cannabis?
Well, it's interesting. The evolution of just my being a lawyer just took a certain path. And of course, like everything, it's right timing at the right place and the intellectual curiosity I had for it. I ended up getting my bachelor's degree from University of California, Santa Cruz, a place that's no stranger to cannabis, of course. And after getting my law degree in Illinois, I ended up working for the Illinois court, and then went to Springfield, Illinois, the capital, and worked for the Illinois General Assembly.
You weren't eating any dogs or cats? Sorry.
Yeah,
sorry. That's Ohio.
Different Springfield.
Sorry.
Plus,
sorry.
Long time vegetarian here. So I did go to Santa Cruz.
Got it.
So then I had that legislative background, and after that, I wound my way to the Illinois Gaming Board, where I was for about 8 years, regulating casinos, slot manufacturers, and similar type entities for the casinos that we have in Illinois. Shortly after that, I found myself in private practice, representing gaming clients before the Gaming Board, which is obviously a very highly regulated industry. I would argue more so than cannabis, legalized cannabis in many states. And in about 2013, Illinois first passed their Medical Use Act. And at the time, people were looking for lawyers who could really help them with a highly regulated industry. And applying for these limited licenses in Illinois was a competitive process. It was very similar to the competition they have when you got to apply competitively for a casino in Illinois. So people kind of sought us out, and we had a few clients come to us. But of course, we had some glitches because it was really against the law for a lawyer to represent someone in an industry that's illegal federally. So back then, myself and a partner of mine, we petitioned the Illinois Supreme Court to allow lawyers to represent clients applying for a marijuana license without fear that we'd lose our license. And I worked for a big law firm, and of course, we weren't going to have insurance coverage until we got some opinion on it. We ended up getting an opinion from the Illinois Bar Association on the ethics of it, and then we were able to convince the Illinois Supreme Court to change the rules of professional conduct. So even though we're helping clients do something illegal federally, as long as it's okay with the state law, we could still do it. And by that time, a few of the potential clients that sought us out had disappeared. They couldn't wait for this long process. But ultimately, we represented a handful of clients to get them licenses in Illinois. And I found that really the way it's regulated, the way it's in some states competitive to get licenses, the way enforcement happens, the way we sometimes have to go to court to challenge enforcement, really to be just very similar to what I was doing in gaming law for the preceding 8 years. And I was able to actually take what I already knew from that and help clients into a new industry where they thought there's no roadmap here. But in some regards, there really was, at least my background in the gaming industry.
Wow. Well,
that's how I got here.
Well, it's really interesting because, I've been doing some looking into, as a matter of fact, I've been approached by a lot of companies, a couple of different companies in Illinois to come in and be involved because I've been in the cannabis industry myself now for over 23 years. And I find it very interesting, especially Illinois law, before we talk about the federal law in the state of where we are. Is it or is it not true that in Illinois there are local municipalities who have legalized or accepted the sale of and dispensing of cannabis, but right next door to other local municipalities who don't accept it? So you can go to a legal dispensary, let's say on block 3, and drive 4 blocks, end up on block 5, and be in a district that doesn't accept it. Is that true or is that false?
No, the way they did the law in Illinois, it's legal in every state. Now, some
Okay.
municipalities could, certainly zone it better and opt out of whether they're going to allow the sale of it. But at least the use of it, you can buy it in one city. Maybe there's no dispensary in your city. Maybe they don't want an adult use dispensary, so you have a problem with zoning. You can certainly still buy it and bring it in.
Okay.
What a lot of municipalities found out was initially they were hesitant to have like adult use dispensaries there, but then they lost business to some neighboring municipality, which is able to get an additional sales tax for that municipality. So a lot of municipalities didn't like it and changed their mind. The weird thing is, I got lucky in some regards because I'm at 1,000. Our team is about 70 lawyers for cannabis, but we have about 1,000 lawyers, and I think 30 offices across the country. So these issues you talk about, I am dealing with my clients across the country. Michigan, for example, where it's very municipal based, whether you can have a dispensary there. You see that across the country.
Gotcha. Okay, let's hone in a little bit on just so we give people a good baseline that we can start. Let's start with the current state of U.S. federal cannabis law. Can you give me a little bit of an overview?
Well, as you know, marijuana, what we'll call cannabis, is illegal federally because it's a Schedule 1 drug. And it's been that way since, I think it was 1970 when we had the Controlled Substances Act, which was really amended after Timothy Leary went to the Supreme Court. But that's a whole other crazy history right there. And but to be a Schedule 1 drug, it's in the same category as like heroin, where it's considered has no medical purposes whatsoever and considered highly addictive. Now, obviously, the states, as we all know, went ahead despite federal law and legalized it for medical or adult use. I think we have 24 states that have legalized it for recreational, 14 medical only. So we got a total of like 38 plus the District of Columbia right now. And all those states are operating contrary to federal law.
And all of them are operating in some ways different than the next one. I mean, there are
Yeah.
so many differences in the way that they administer their law. It's almost mind-boggling. I spent some time recently with, a dispensary no, not a dispensary, a license owner in the district, and I'm completely blown out the door by the way the District of Columbia, which is, a lot of people don't understand, they really are under the scrutiny of the federal government because they don't have their own state government. And I'm blown away by how it's administered there. It's so crazy. You can't sell cannabis itself, but you can sell all the ancillary products that go along with it. And then you price those up so high that you give away the cannabis. It's like, what?
Yeah. Well, that's a little. There's different penalties if you sell cannabis, legally. So if you sell an ancillary product at like a higher price and you give cannabis with it, it's like purportedly a gift and it's free. It's this kind of way to get out of that legal trap.
I know, but
That's a complicated thing right there.
that
For
one
sure.
is so
That's why they're
complicated.
doing it.
That one is so complicated for me. I've been, because I've been, I should say, for 100% complete disclosure, so I have been in this industry, in and out of the industry, a couple of times, and I'm presently I have product in the marketplace in Massachusetts, and I have product in the marketplace in Georgia. We're going to talk about Georgia and its unique laws that they have, the way they pass their law. But and for a moment I was looking to try to get into DC, but in DC, if my brand went there, then it becomes this really just convoluted, really strange way of having to try to do business. I mean, because we have to kind of agree on a price so that the dispensary or so that so dispensary or the facilitator can make sure that they can mark up things around it enough so that they can provide. It's just kind of crazy. So
Yeah.
I'm like on hold there for now. And almost all the states have some unique, weird little law that actually differentiates it from these states that were, a mile away.
Well, and this is exactly you're in just a couple states and you see the problem you have. And then, of course, you have a lot of my clients who started in Illinois 10 years ago and now are in, you know, a dozen states across the country or more, having like entire legal departments to figure out all these multi state nuances and operating procedures for all their employees in different states. It's it's not too dissimilar to gaming law, which I'm used to, which is different in every state. But like you said, the differences here are even greater than that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in gaming, I mean, okay, I can understand how a municipality could say, I don't want to have a casino in my backyard. However, if I go to a casino in the backyard of the little municipality next door to them and I win a jackpot, I don't have to take that money and pay additional taxes in a separate place for the money that I won in that casino in this place. It's so strange. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that it brings us to this recent development with the House Appropriations Committee that approved basically a block to the Biden administration's efforts to reschedule cannabis. What's your take on this? Because, I mean, first off, the administration announced that they were going to allow the DEA, and I thought that this law was something that could be administered by the DEA, but the fact that House Appropriations Committee stepped in and has blocked it, it's I'm again mind blown. Can you explain what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, as you know, Biden administration, the Health and Human Services recommended cannabis be legalized,
Yes.
and then the Department of Justice has to take it. The proposed rules has to go to the Department of Justice to weigh in, go before and have a hearing, and then before it can become law. And of course, the Appropriation Committee, put in the bill so you couldn't use money to go forward with it to try to stall the whole process right there. But I don't even know how much of that is still going to even exist now because Trump weighed in and he's got some influence with a lot of other Republicans. So I feel like it's stalled right now, but I think it might change a lot.
Let's talk about that too, because honestly, I was a little bit. I've been saying this on this podcast for over 2 years now. The candidate that steps up to the plate. I even had a conversation with, I won't say which party, but with a group of people who are on the campaign committee for one of the candidates, and I said, it was about 2 weeks ago. I was like, I'm telling you, you need to step up to the plate because the president has stepped in and weighed in Florida, stating that he's going to vote for adult use in Florida, and contrary to what the current governor in Florida is proposing and coming out of his mouth, um, making Trump appear to a large constituency. And I want to make sure that my listeners understand, because I've had people push back at me and say, well, people smoke cannabis. That's not really that big of a demographic. Need to stop and check yourself. Because back in 2021, the legal cannabis market in America sold over $25 billion worth of cannabis. 25 billion. We know for a fact that the illegal gray and black markets in America sold somewhere around $75 billion worth of cannabis. That $25 billion worth of cannabis makes it one of the largest selling or highest selling consumer products in America. It sold more cannabis in 2021 than we sold milk. I mean, you got to think about that. Milk's in every grocery store in America. We sold more cannabis in volume and in money than we sold of milk. We sold more cannabis than we sold of all energy drinks. Recently, I just saw a report that says that we actually sell more cannabis now than we sell cigarettes in America and alcohol. What? That's an illegal market. So if we're selling that in a legal market, then you bring into play this black and gray market, and especially like in states like New York, where they just stepped in and I guess I'm a little off with the numbers, but they confiscated, I think it was, 30, $40 million worth of cannabis products.
At least.
Yeah, that were being sold at bodegas and all these other little places in the city under the guise of hemp-based cannabis products. They went in and confiscated that and destroyed it. And I'm 100% behind that, to be actually 100% disclosure on that, because a lot of these products that are being sold in these bodegas and all these little, pop-up smoke shops haven't been tested, and are some of the filthiest products in the market. So I don't have
I,
no shame in.
I agree with you on
Yeah,
that one.
I think that that's something that those who. One of the problems has been that we have put a program in place without cleaning up what was there beforehand. We should have done more work at making sure that we could block some of the gray and black market. And there's this gray, and I use the term gray and black because, in the gray market, we have people out all over the country selling what they consider to be hemp-based and hemp-derived products that they think are legal, but they really aren't legal. And then you have the people who are just straight up selling black market grown cannabis products. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
this is and I mean, I don't know.
I,
Yeah,
I'd love to comment on
sure,
it.
please.
Yeah, because one of the problem you see in New York and you see in California too, because you're absolutely right. The legalization there has just made the black market worse, I would argue, than it was before.
I agree with you
You know,
100%.
and they get put in a trick box because if you're going to legalize it, license it, have it for testing, have it for safety, kind of like I can go in a liquor store and buy alcohol, and I feel reasonably confident I'm not going to go blind and the alcohol is good. But the problem is you legalize it or decriminalize it, but then you have to still enforce on what's being sold illegally. Just like if I put up an illegal liquor store selling my moonshine, they go after me. I can't do that. The problem is some states decriminalize it and legalize it, but then don't enforce the laws of people selling it illegally, and the people selling it illegally don't have to pay taxes or deal with the 280E problem. And for your listeners that don't know, people who are selling marijuana legally and they're licensed by the states, people hear the revenue numbers like you just talked about it and all the money that's being sold. And in Illinois, our taxes for marijuana is greater than what it is for liquor. And they see the numbers and they think all these cannabis operators are making huge sums of money. But they're not allowed to, under 280E to deduct any expenses. They still got to file taxes. They can't deduct expenses for anything towards their marijuana, like operation, like a normal business, because it's illegal federally. So you're paying wages, you're paying rent. You can't deduct that stuff. Pretty much, except for cost of goods sold, your revenue equals your profit, and you got to pay taxes on it, which has a collective rate of about 60 something percent. You're like, hey, might as well sell illegally as long as the state's going to let me rent a place in strip mall, put up a big sign that says dispensary. I'm not licensed. I'll just sell black market stuff. The legalized guys can't compete with me. And so the states, like you take Illinois or a lot of other states, of course, they don't have that problem. But the glitch with, I think, New York and some other states is they were decriminalizing it for social justice reasons and inequitable enforcement in the past. So they don't, they're hesitant to go arrest people who are selling it illegally and put them in jail, because that was one of the things behind legalizing it. And so there's that weird glitch, I guess,
Yeah, I mean, I call it glitch too, but at the same time, it's just, I think, ignorance on the part of those who are writing the administrative rules, who don't really understand what they started writing these rules for. I mean, you get a whole bunch of people who have been against cannabis their whole life, and all of a sudden say, "I'm going to put you in charge of dispensing this," and these people don't even know what there is that they're dispensing. They don't even understand that there is a difference between hemp-based, chemically pushed Delta 9 products than there are originally grown, legal, tested Delta 9 products. And so I'm completely baffled. I want to ask you another question about something that just actually changed recently in the law, but I want to go back for a second. I know when you got involved in this, I have been saying this at conventions and places around the world for the last 13 years, not last 2 years, 3 years, last 13 years. I have said to our industry, first off, I think the biggest mistake, the industry itself is its own nemesis. It's its own biggest thorn in its side. Because first off, you got all these people who jumped in this industry who thought they were going to buy their big yacht and they were going to make all this money and everybody else be damned. So they set up all these walls and they tell on each other and they try their best to report to each other rather than work together like Big Pharma did and has for the last 70, 80 years, understanding that the rising tide will lift all boats. But instead, we're acting like we are individual little knockabouts out there by ourselves trying to find, our way to the front of the race. So the second this industry actually comes together and really comes together and recognizes that we need to have some sort of an industry lobbying coordinated effort among all of us, I think this industry is going to just flounder. However, for at least the last 13 years, I've been talking about the fact that if you go back to 2001, or it was really early 2002, when the Fed issued itself its own patent, 663 or 6630507 or 6630507.
Your memory's better than mine.
Yep. They issued themselves their own patent on CBD and other minor cannabinoids.
Marinol, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, and they were able to get Marinol out of that, but they literally held that patent and extended it 3 times. I'm not sure if it's still extended now to today. So technically, the Fed could step in right now and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to agree to having cannabis be rescheduled, but anybody out there that's selling a product that has CBD in it or THCA in it or any of the other minor cannabinoids that we identified back in 2002 in our application after we had spent so much money on all the research that we spent on it in the 80s and 90s, anybody selling those products, get it off your shelf today or we're going to come shut you down. I don't care if you're a legal dispenser or not. Is that true or is that false now?
Well, I'll be candid. I'm not a patent lawyer. I'm totally aware that they have that patent and they have that. And I heard Marinol's not the best because the feds weren't so great at growing marijuana, or who the one person they gave it to, so no one really likes it anyway.
Yeah, I had a prescription. I had a prescription for it, and I can tell you something. It's the worst shit in the planet wide.
That's what I heard.
They isolated what they thought was Delta 9. They isolated that by itself with nothing else in there. And when you take that stuff, I'm telling you, man, it is the weirdest. For me, it was the weirdest. The only reason why I haven't got a prescription was because I had to travel outside of the United States. And I thought, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to make sure I'm not carrying anything on me. I'm going to have something legal. So I went and got a prescription. It was one of the most expensive prescriptions I ever had filled. 1. 2, I took this on an airplane headed to Israel. I was going to Israel to speak. And I'm telling you, man, I sat in this chair and wigged out for at least 4 hours before that shit went away. And I took the whole prescription, dumped out almost 90% of it, kept a couple of the pills in the bottom of the bottle so that I knew when I was going through, they would actually see that I actually had their actual real medication. But I never took another one.
Yeah. Luckily, you would have got better stuff in Israel, I'm sure.
I did get better stuff in Israel, by the way. As soon as I got in, I was going there to speak on cannabis and work on cannabis with some members of the Knesset. And literally at the airport, I was so shocked. I'm in the airport. I had this person come to escort me through customs. I'm standing in the line in customs, and my guy says, "Oh, and by the way, I got a really nice gift for you." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, here we'll see." This is a guy who literally gets to walk through customs in Israel like he's the prince of whatever because he paid for it. And we stepped through. He reaches inside of his pocket. He had already gone in the airport, come out of the airport, reaches in his pocket, pulls out an envelope this big. I had at least 4 ounces in there, and I was only going to be there for 3 days. I was like, dude, you think I'm crazy?
He must have been well connected because I got stuck for like 2 hours with a bottle of wine trying to bring it home from Israel.
Wow. Yeah.
Very tough there.
Yeah.
But, I was going to say, because, the little I do know about patent law is a lot of patents are challenged. People can apply for them and get them. I think when the federal government applies for it, I'm sure with the patent date, it's a fait accompli and they just get it without a lot of scrutiny. And I know that in these substances that are naturally derived and it pre-existed anyone doing a patent, you generally can't get a patent from. I can't patent the daisy in my backyard. It's obviously a natural thing, been there for a long time. So I suspect they would have trouble enforcing that, even though I'm not a patent lawyer and it would easily be challenged. But you raise a good point because the federal government's had that patent for a long time. It's not widely talked about. I've never really heard anyone explain how the federal government got a patent on that, but my clients can't apply for federal patents because it's illegal federally.
Right.
And except for the fact that they did it because of the federal government, I've never heard any legal justification for that.
Okay, yeah,
So,
I think they submitted the patent in 2000. No, in 1999, they wrote it up, they submitted it. It took them a year and a half. 2002 is when they actually granted themselves that patent. And I know for a fact that I think it was 2018 or 2017 they renewed it. And it was really weird because when you think back about this, every year our Congress and Senate has had to pass a budget, and every year since then they have passed the budget, and one of the lines in that budget has included the continuation of the funding to that University of Mississippi project. Now we got a government that is actually saying every single year we support cannabis research, but we don't support cannabis, and we support research because we have a patent.
well, you just brought it full circle to one of the reasons why there's currently a proposal to deschedule, because one of the criteria is that it's got a medical use.
Correct.
And it's been a Schedule 1 since 1970, I guess.
Right.
And the criteria to be a Schedule 1 is that it has no medical use whatsoever. It doesn't make any sense how they can get a patent on it and have a prescription drug that you get from a physician for marijuana, but at the same time it has no medical use, and it's been like that, and it's still like that until they change it.
It's absolutely as asinine as it can ever be.
Pounding your head against a brick wall. And I try to explain to people, my clients, this stuff, and it just comes back to politics.
Right.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Like you said, I completely agree. Having marijuana that's just out there, not tested. Some people are selling synthetic stuff from overseas. The stuff that's sold illegally, they're selling that to that could be sold to kids. I can go into some convenience store and they have some cannabinoid marijuana derivative or cannabis. A 13-year-old can buy it.
Right.
I think most of the convenience stores that I'm familiar with, my neighborhood don't do that, but I know there are definitely thousands that do.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm involved. I had mentioned to you earlier. I'm involved in the state of Georgia. In Georgia, they passed a very interesting law down there, and I know your guys have probably reviewed it because there's only two master licenses that have been given out, and a couple of the smaller minor licenses. The master licenses, one was given to Tilray, the other was given to a company called Botanical Sciences that I happen to be working with, and they have such a weird law. I mean, one, I still haven't figured out what they mean by 5% by volume, but that's this arbitrary number that they came up with about 5% by volume of THC in anything that you sell, but it doesn't make any sense because they got products down there that have 3, 4, 5, 1,000 milligrams of THC in a product of, let's say, a tincture or another. And it's like, I don't know, how do you get away with doing that? But then they also have added to this law that they can't have anything smokable or vaporable or anything edible. However, they let you sell tinctures, pills. You can't sell gummies, but I'm about to release a product down there that's called a melt. MELT.
A lozenge.
It's kind of a lozenge or a melt, and it's really not edible because it's a lot. It's like, what? And yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not. You're probably more familiar with the minutiae of the Georgia law than I am, but a lot of that comes from the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and then each state has its own, Georgia Food and Cosmetic Act, where they define food stuff, which is, stuff I would get like, Taco Bell or something like that, just regular food. But a lozenge is not necessarily considered a food. It's a dietary supplement, or it's for medicinal purposes. You can buy off the shelf at Walgreens if I have a sore throat or something like that. So, that's where, for better or worse, lawyers come trying to work around those definitions.
Absolutely.
And then you get to...
Yep, because one of the things that they do there is that Georgia's also different in the fact that they allow independent pharmacies to sell cannabis. They have a dispensary network, And then you can also contract with independent pharmacies. For a little while, before the DEA and the Health and Human Services came out with their memo, the DEA had sent the letter down to all of those independent pharmacies and said, "We're going to come down on your head if you get involved in this." So they all got scared, and then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
the letter came out, the memo came out, and they all jumped back on again. And now that it's kind of gone back to that last thing that came out, now
Well,
they're running scared again.
and after Trump weighed in, they're probably now okay with it because it seems like, at least from what Trump said and what Harris said, both of them are on the same track to continue the legalization. I mean, now I know Trump came out and said he's going to vote for, what is it, the Amendment 3 in Florida to legalize it there.
Yes.
And they need like 60% of the vote there. And it seems like it's on target. But he also went further and indicated that he was not going to interfere and would support the proposed rules right now at the federal level, which, as you know, has a hearing date post-election.
Is that what
And
they
I
did? I'm
suspect,
sorry. I want to ask
yeah,
you about that because I know that they already had opened up for public comment, and then that closed about 35, 40 days ago. So I was under the
yeah.
impression that they had 90 days before they had to do something, but I guess now they stretched that out. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. They were going to have a hearing before the election, and then they moved it to, I think, some early December date. So then it goes to a hearing, and people go there and they send in comments, and some people go and they testify for and against, and then there's a recommendation. But even then, let's say that happens, people still have a certain right to what they call administrative review, which is to appeal and say, hey, the agency's determination to legalize it is unreasonable, violated some procedural or substantive law. So that could happen. So it doesn't mean, that can go on for a while. And who knows what a court will do, and that can get reversed. So we may have a little long road. But Georgia, for one time, you might be ahead of the game because it seems like we're on the path, whether it's 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, to get this so-called legalization that's proposed right now. But that just changes it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. That doesn't legalize marijuana that's being sold right now, except maybe in Georgia has a little bit of a model by selling it through the pharmacy.
But I also think that also it's going to be opening up a quagmire that they don't even understand what they're going to end up getting. Okay, all right, let's change this from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. If you change it to Schedule 3, who does it come under? It comes under the FDA. So therefore, if it comes under the FDA, that means that all the dispensaries have to be FDA approved. Well, wait a minute, none of them are. So then what do we do? Well, let's say I just there's just so much of this stupidity around this. And first off, from my perspective, the fact that you've said it multiple times, and for our listeners and viewers to understand, a Schedule 1 drug supposedly has no medical benefit whatsoever. In the Schedule 2, cocaine is in Schedule 2. Cocaine. And what a lot of people who are listening right now don't understand is that you can, in certain places in this country, they are still using pharmaceutical grade cocaine for various reasons, for preoperative and postoperative administration. That's happening right now today. So now we make it Schedule 3. If we make it Schedule 3, that means that all the things that are on the shelves in any dispensary around the country really fall under FDA purview. And the FDA ain't going to give that up. Are you kidding me? So then we're going to go through 5 or 6 years of BS arguments over laws to kind of try to figure out how we put people who never believed in cannabis before in charge of dispensing that same product.
Yeah, I mean, well, if it goes to Schedule 3, what else? In Schedule 3, you got ketamine,
Right?
you got Ambien,
Mm-hmm.
you actually have cocaine in Schedule 2, like you said, but cocaine below a certain amount is Schedule 3. So you still got to get a prescription. So even if this passes, we still have to then, theoretically, for some foreseeable future, things would remain the exact same. Everything that's being sold right now in Illinois, still illegal federally. They've set up the federal government for medical cannabis to be Schedule 3, but then we still have to wait for some legislative fix to now allow it for adult use, like alcohol. And then, like you said, even the medical cannabis, state laws are going to have to be changed one by one. It could take a period of 5, 10 years, like we saw happen in the last 10 years, till those catch up. and we figure out how medical cannabis can be sold through pharmacies. But what does that do to the existing systems we have in these states, many of which were set up not just to legalize the drugs for people who are sick and needed medical cannabis as something in their quiver to try that worked for them. But in addition, we also gave licenses out to a lot of people for social equity reasons in various states for the past war on crime. And we can take all that away. How does that work? So there is another decade-long road post federal moving it to Schedule 3 to get these things in jibe. So someday my great grandkids will have a system that's somewhat settled like alcohol and prescription drugs.
Maybe.
That's not happening overnight.
Yeah, maybe.
That's not happening overnight.
Because I literally, I talk to people all the time and say, oh, I think it's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. And I say, are you kidding me? You need to wake up and smell the roses, because 3 to 5 years is not enough time. This is going to take at least 10, maybe 15 years.
I just gave it a decade, maybe. Yeah, exactly. We're on the same page. Now, this is a step for that. This takes care of that tax issue we talked about earlier. So people who are getting adult use licenses or whatever and opening up a dispensary here, now can play on an even playing field. And maybe they'll be able to compete with the illegal market. That's why I think that, going to Schedule 3 would at least allow people to not be subject to the 280E tax penalty. And that might help with some of the competition with the illegal market. So I'm optimistic there, at least.
Okay, good. I'm glad you are. Now, look, another big change recently was the Supreme Court overturning the Chevron doctrine. Now, can you explain what the Chevron doctrine is and how it's been abandoned impacts cannabis and cannabis regulations?
Yeah, it should have a big impact. But I'll give a quick, not too boring summary of the Chevron doctrine, which I remember actually learning it in law school in the early 90s, and it was a little thing on my exam. I never realized it would be such a big part of my personal life. But in that case, the original case was the Chevron versus the Natural Resources Defense Council, if I remember, which was at the Supreme Court. In that case, it was actually dealt with a challenge to a Reagan administration trying to narrow their interpretation of the Clean Air Act. And in that case, the court was tasked with seeing if the interpretation by the executive branch was reasonable or not, or whether they should go with it. Because every time there's a statute doesn't speak on an issue, or there's an ambiguity over a phrase or term, it goes to the court, and they look at the plain language of the statute, interpret it, and say what it is. We all know the legislature passes the law, executive branch enforces the law, and judges interpret it for it. Simple as that. But in that case, the court held that where a government agency has an interpretation of a law, either because the law is silent on it or ambiguous, the court should give due deference to their interpretation. So if I go to court and I'm battling the government, I say, statute I think means this, government thinks it means something different, even if a judge agrees with me, if any reasonable person can think what the government thinks, they win, even though a judge thinks it's wrong. And that's what Chevron doctrine ruled. And that is basically how the federal government and all the court cases have been going for decades, for a major expansion of the administrative state. But not just for battles over the interpretation of rules, for agencies to write whole swaths of rules from scratch. That just basically opened the door to not just their interpretation of language, but what they interpreted the scope of their very authority to be. You and I might think, hey, maybe you look at the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and you read the statute. You don't think it should cover, just hypothetically, lozenges, for example. But then they write tens of thousands of pages of rules written by the agencies that go well beyond the plain language of the statute, completely expanding the scope of their authority and criminal penalties. And that's what's been happening ever since the Chevron doctrine.
Okay.
But that it was long-lived until just last year when the case, I got it written down because I'm always forgetting the title.
Sure.
It was against the Secretary of Commerce. So it was Lober Bright Enterprises. Now that case dealt with basically some fishing statute and whether the interpretation of that would work. And in that case, the current court, which as you know is a little more conservative on the administrative state and the scope of the federal government. In that case, they just overturned the Chevron doctrine. And basically, one of the lines that stuck out in my head was they felt that the Chevron doctrine prevented judges from judging because they were basically conceding what the statute should mean to some bureaucrats. And basically they felt in the Loper case that the Chevron doctrine really reestablished the separation of powers that the Constitution had, which we talked about earlier. The legislature writes a law, and purportedly they intend certain things from it. The executive branch enforces it, and the judiciary, judges interpret it. In that case, they didn't want the executive branch to both enforce it and then through their agencies say what it means. And I'll give you an example. We were just talking about one of the things that Chevron doctrine held was that agencies can basically determine the scope of their own authority. I sue state agencies all the time. And state agencies always think they have authority to do what they're doing. And they always think they need more of it, and they should have more of it. And the Chevron doctrine really changed that. And the thing is, it cuts both ways. I know a lot of people are talking politically, this would help Trump and things like that. And remember, originally, it was, the Reagan administration trying to narrow the interpretation of the Clean Air Act because they wanted to deregulate. And the Supreme Court there, gave them deference. But, let's say Trump gets in office or anyone conservative in the future and they want to reinterpret what a law says for their political perspective. The courts aren't going to necessarily let them. And so, this really narrows the scope of the executive branch trying to have scope creep and enforcement creep, I think.
Well, let's bring this into cannabis. So now, administratively, the executive branch is saying to a organization, the DEA, that we're going to let you interpret this and change it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Is the Supreme Court saying, no, DEA, you don't have that authority to do that? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they still can enforce it, but they don't necessarily get deference as to whether it's reasonable. For example, the DEA has issued opinions right now on certain cannabinoids and whether those are legal or illegal under the Farm Bill if they're derived from hemp. They have opinions they've issued on Delta-8, Delta-8 THCO. The DEA right now, in the past, has been opposed to legalization. And in fact, the DEA opposes the analysis done to legalize cannabis right now. Remember, I was telling you the proposed rules were put out and Health and Human Services recommended we legalize it and did a certain analysis saying it should be legalized for this reason. It has currently accepted medical use, doesn't have a potential for abuse. The DEA has kind of a different analysis, and we're not quite sure that they're on board with that. But you and I were just doing a rational analysis about whether it has currently accepted medical use. We were just talking like 5 minutes ago on that. And whether it's got a potential for abuse, which are some criteria. And the court's going to look at this in a more rational, objective way, I think. And so I don't really think this stands in the way of the current proposal to legalize it and get these regulations.
Yeah, I mean, well, and also we can't. I said we can't. It's just that we should not be looking at this in a vacuum. We, the United States of America, back in, what was it, 1962 or 63, the world signed that treaty, or the UN had a treaty that they put out that stopped the inter-country distribution of hemp and hemp products. And in the last 5 years, over 200 countries have pulled out of that treaty. So all over the world, we see the proliferation of cannabis everywhere. I mean, from South Africa to Colombia to Brazil to Mexico to you name it. I mean, within the next 4 or 5 years, and justifiably so, because a lot of these other countries, I'm not going to call them third world countries, but all these other countries are starting to recognize that the medical benefits of cannabis far outweigh some of the pricing of pharmaceuticals that the U.S. government has been shoving down their throats. So they're saying, hold on, we got people here who are actually thriving because they're using cannabis instead of all these pharmaceuticals. So we're going to go ahead and continue to do this because it lessens the price for our constituents. The world is not going to, I don't think, going to give a crap what America does because they're starting to recognize that the sales of cannabis all over the world, Australia, South America, Isle of Man, UK, all over the world. China's growing hemp like, in a million hectare kinds of ways. I'm working with a company out of South Africa that they have under contract right now close to 1 million hectares of land that they're actually growing hemp and cannabis products on. Now, it's very weird because South Africa has this, they're allowing them to grow it, they're allowing them to extract it, process it, and distribute it, but they're not allowing their own constituents to smoke it or use it, which is weird. However, they have caught on to the fact that the rest of the world is going to go back to a place that the whole world was in back in the mid 18th century, middle of 1700s. Hemp was prolific all over the world. Cannabis was prolific all over the world. We were using it and on a regular daily basis as a medicinal agent, like you said, an additional medicine in that quiver.
Yeah, or fibers.
Yes, or fibers. And, then we even touch on that. I mean, the fact that right now we got two companies that are being trading on the U.S. Stock Exchange that are using graphene made from cannabis to use for batteries. And the electrical storage we know is so much better. We've got companies all over the world who are utilizing the fibers for hempcrete. And for clothing, again, we're starting to go back to where we were. Most of the people in the United States don't even recognize the fact that our entire Revolutionary Army was clothed in hemp fiber.
Yeah.
The only thing that
this is it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is at least where the Farm Bill helps us, and at least that's not that's somewhat established. So now at least we can have hemp fiber and use hemp in various ways, and we're not going back on that.
Well, with all these changes and challenges that you've seen, I mean, what do you see as the future for cannabis? I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but what do you think is going to be the future for cannabis here in the United States?
Well, just going back even to the Chevron doctrine we were talking about, let's say hypothetically, I've heard some people tell me that they think the conservatives and Donald Trump, say they're pro-cannabis to get the vote, but they're not really going to be. I mean, that's where the Chevron doctrine kind of is going to help the future of cannabis in many regards, because so let's say a conservative gets in office and they oppose these regulations, and someone sues down the road to legalize cannabis, saying it shouldn't be Schedule 1, it should be Schedule 3. Under the Chevron doctrine, the court's going to look at those two criteria we talked about. Currently accepted medical use. I don't think it's really in dispute that it's got some currently accepted medical use. The government admits it when it got its patent back in the day.
And you read their abstract, and it tells exactly what they believe it's capable of doing. Yes,
exactly. So if some agency came out and opposed it and said, well, we have an interpretation, you got to give us deference. Well, now because of Chevron, court can say, that's stupid. Obviously, it's got a medical use. You wouldn't have got a patent saying it did. So Chevron doctrine would help that effort. And then the potential for abuse, which is the other criteria to move it to Schedule 3, it's potential for abuse relative to other drugs in the schedules. I don't think it's too disputable that cannabis has a potential for abuse that is less than heroin, less than cocaine, less than other things. So just looking at those criteria alone, getting rid of the Chevron doctrine, if someone was challenging those rules in court or the scheduling in court, even if those rules don't go through, we have a lot better chance now because of the Supreme Court. But it also helps just the state operators and my clients. So the future of cannabis, there's a lot of cannabis regulation, obviously, as we've talked about. And in some states, the regulators, you mentioned, sometimes the regulators are put in charge and they're anti-marijuana. They don't want to see it go. And I've seen that quite a lot. Maybe the legislature passes it, but the governor's not too gung-ho on it and put someone in charge who's kind of, slowing it down, passing unreasonable regulations, doing draconian enforcement against my clients. Those are the clients who call me to go challenge in court these agencies for their unreasonableness or their draconian enforcement. And one of the things that we've had a problem with is the agencies get a deferral on their interpretation of statutes. But the Chevron doctrine has kind of trickled down from the Supreme Court to state courts. And now we have grounds to say, hey, our interpretation of the laws and your own reasonable interpretation of it should not get deference. And I think that jurisprudence trickles down to state courts and helps my clients, frankly.
Okay, so
But in the mean,
go ahead.
but in the meantime, yeah, just going forward, what does it look like? You and I seem to be on the same page that we have a good decade plus to really get to a more kind of settled area with it. But I do think that, at least just take the next, if I had a crystal ball and I was going to try to guess what's going to happen in the next year, it seems like the candidates, at least, both are on board to try to get this to a Schedule 3. That kind of changes the environment for tax-wise for some of these clients to thrive and compete. I'm hopeful that would reduce some of the gray and black markets in some of these jurisdictions. And I think one problem we have, which you talked about, which I'm trying to figure out how that's going to get resolved, is not everyone's on board, and we're working against each other. As you and I know, cannabis is just cannabis. Whether it's derived from hemp or not, it's the same product. But we have seen this bifurcating of the hemp market to the licensed marijuana market competing. And, until everyone can kind of get on board and state regulators can kind of get on board for that, it just impacts all of us negatively, and it affects the safety, I think, of our kids for some of these products being sold. So I think, the legalizing it or putting it to Schedule 3 on the federal market is a priority, but at the same time, the states and the federal government trying to get together and not have this infighting so we can at least make sure we have safe products on the market so people don't get injured and kids don't get a hold of it.
Right before we started this interview, one of my peeps, matter of fact, Keith, who's our engineer and produces this, sent me a really great email talking about the fact that recently published in the Journal of Applied Health and Economics and Health Policy, the federal legalization of medical cannabis could save the United States healthcare system somewhere around $29 billion a year, is what this says. A company with 50 employees in the United States with cannabis laws, 50 employees in a state with cannabis laws could expect to spend $14,000 plus less on health insurance premiums per year compared to a similar sized company in a state without medical cannabis. I mean, we're showing the benefits of cannabis, are beneficial to the bottom line of a lot of these companies. And, I feel as if, and I've said it multiple times, I keep saying, it's going to take some of these diehard 20, 30 year, 7, 8 term congressmen and senators to kick the bucket before we start actually seeing, a new generation come in that recognizes that, you know what, it wasn't as bad as they said it was before we start making changes. But I mean, this could affect the bottom line of a nation. We could save hundreds of billions of dollars in medical costs in this country.
Yeah, because that's all out of pocket. If I'm having trouble sleeping or something, they'll give me a script for Ambien. But if I want to try some marijuana, which has less side effects, less of a potential for abuse, that's out of pocket, and the prices, can be quite high. I do think, at least the state experiment we have, the political experiment we have, where states have legalized it, despite federal law, and the federal government's not enforcing it against state licensed operators, at least. That is slowly having an effect on these dinosaurs you mentioned who have been in Congress. I mean, you look at Trump changing, you look at what's happening in Florida, and I do think there's a trickle up effect, but it's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard, and I do think the bottom line is something that's helping. We actually see now some more rigorous research in the U.S. on marijuana. We see everyone, if you go back 10 years ago, maybe not so much now. But if I'm at a cocktail party and I'm talking to people about how marijuana helped me with my arthritis or to help me with the sleep, there'll be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 other people in that room. Oh yeah, I tried it. It helps me. Oh yeah, I tried it. It helps me. And that gets around, and companies, like you say,
yeah, no,
that's what they want. That's what they want.
I'm agreeing with you 100%. But I've also thought, I don't know. Do you watch streaming movies and things and streaming?
Sure.
Okay. Well, recently in the last, let's say, 3 years, some of the most popular streamed, miniseries and those kind of things. You turn them on, and I swear to you, it blows my mind how almost every single heroine or hero or heroine in the program, they come home from work. They come home from work, and what do? They immediately go to the counter, pour themselves four fingers of some brown liquor, pour it down their throat. I mean, I'm telling you, it doesn't matter whether they're a star in a comedy, they're a star in a violent cop movie. But then just recently, in the last really 3 months, I'm starting to see inside these streamers more of the heroes and more of the stars
Yeah.
of the shows literally pulling out a pre-roll out of nowhere, sitting there smoking it, and nobody even comments about it. That's what I'm saying. It's like it's becoming part of the fabric of those programs. There's a very
Yeah.
popular streamer out right now that's called
Well, I was just watching A Perfect Couple.
there you go.
Yeah.
That's it, the
Yeah.
perfect couple. I was
Yeah.
watching
Yeah.
that last week and I was blown away saying, you know what? This is really the first one of these kinds of shows that I've
Yeah.
seen where literally cannabis is part of the show. Nobody's shoving it down anybody's throat, but the hero in the star in
Yeah.
that movie, he's firing up a joint every 5 seconds. And the only thing that bothered me was the fact that they also showed him, pouring a little brown liquor every once in a blue moon,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
also noticed that, I'm sorry, like you talk about, you go to a Hollywood party right now, and any party you go to, there is a room that the pot smokers are going to, or there's the balcony that the pot smokers are going out on, or there's the lanai that they're going out on, and it's not even brought up. Nobody even mentions it. Nobody even thinks about it. And I think that the more and more we start to see things like that, will be the things that actually start to persuade the masses that there's nothing wrong with this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The bad thing I didn't like about that movie is they seem to show him abusing it a little. I mean, necessarily
Yeah,
or chronically smoking, which. But you're right. It didn't have any stereotypes of him being stoned or anything. It was just going about his normal thing with his normal family. If you didn't see him lighting up a joint, you'd never even know.
right.
And it just completely normalized it, which is a lot of people's experience in daily life now.
You're absolutely right. It did flip me out a little bit because at first I kept watching. I was like, he's smoking a cigarette. That's the first time I've seen anybody smoking a cigarette. And I thought, wait, that ain't a cigarette. He's smoking a pre roll. And then when they had him at the desk making his pre rolls, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And my wife, who is not a consumer at all, she doesn't touch it. She tolerates me. She didn't even comment about it. I said, baby, do you notice that this is the first series that we've watched where throughout the entire thing, every single episode, he's firing up a joint. And she goes, oh, I thought he was smoking a cigarette. No, he's firing up a joint. I said, look at it. That's a joint. She
Yeah,
went,
it was definitely a joint.
yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah,
Because how often do you take it and share it with someone else anyway? So,
correct.
unless it's a joint.
Yeah, and since COVID, that's probably the one thing that's kind of desocialized it in a way, but now there's ways that people have figured it out. I mean, I think, you go to any dispensary, let's say in the Massachusetts area, you're buying, little containers of 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 pre-rolls. So people have understood that, if I'm going to go grab a pre-roll and I got some friends there, I'll just give them one of mine. You know what I mean? So then everybody has their own individual pre-roll that they go out on the balcony and smoke rather than stand out there with one and pass it around.
That's exactly my COVID experience in my backyard. I'm right there with you. And COVID did have it's had some positive, just our experiences there and how we change our lives had some positive externalities. I totally think marijuana got a little more normalized during COVID. All the dispensaries were considered essential services in all the states. We're all sitting home not knowing what the hell to do, and we're completely stressed out. And a lot of people were consuming. We know alcohol sales went through the roof, and after a little while, you realize that's not really good for me. I wake up feeling terrible,
Correct. We
and
started.
marijuana sales, yeah.
Yep.
People are like, I'm going to try marijuana. I don't have to go to work like I used to, but it's just a different world. And I don't think it ever went back.
I was I've had multiple conversations about this without having to have a lecture or having to have, somebody come in and tell you about it. People found their way to cannabis during COVID who would have never found their way there for exactly the reason why you're saying. Because after that fifth day of waking up after consuming a half a fifth of vodka or a half a fifth of bourbon or a half a fifth of something else, and they woke up in the morning going, man, this is like, I can't do this anymore. I think I'll try a joint. It wasn't like one of these conscious conversations where you think you ought to smoke marijuana instead of drinking alcohol. No, people just gravitated in the right direction, and that's what helped to push those sales to $25 billion a year in 20.
And there were palpable products for a lot of people who didn't want to smoke a joint. I mean, just the chocolate covered this, the chocolate bars. I mean, the M&M like things. I mean, they got salad dressing by me. The beverages. I mean, they got like strawberry flavored beverages that have like low, 2.5, 3 milligrams of THC. You can hang out with a friend, have a 6-pack. That was just an entry point for people who, for whatever reason, just don't want to smoke and don't want the smoke in their lungs. And the timing was weird. And like I said, we just haven't gone back. So that gave us a big push.
Yes.
Where do we get it in the future though? Like where I can go to like a liquor store and it's all being sold legally through a liquor store and it's nothing illegal. That's the future. But just to get from here to there is a lot of political and legal minutia that's going to take time.
Well, look, Bob, I got to tell you something, my friend.
Bill.
I'm sorry, I said Bill. Bob.
It happens all the time. Don't worry about it.
Look, I'm almost out of time, and I think I kept popping off on other questions, and I've got probably another 20 questions for you. So I would love to have you back, sir. Please, if you have the time, next couple of weeks, let's do this again, because I think, I want my listeners to understand that, there's a possibility of a part 2 where we can give out even more and more information.
Yeah, my pleasure. Sounds great.
Okay, for sure. And how about leave me with a note? I mean, anything you want to leave us with before we pull out?
Well, I just, people want change. The most important thing people need to do is talk to their representatives and senators. There's been bills to legalize it in the federal government, like adult use. There's a Schumer-Booker bill. It's got some issues, but either way, these changes, like we're talking about, happen when it's out there. But at the same time, for each one person that calls the state rep saying, I think you should do this or support Bill Y or Bill X that's going through the legislature, they know there's another 1,000 people that feel that way. Tell your state reps and state senators how you feel. Send them an email. They do read that stuff. That's what changes it, so we can get safe products out there and try to move this timeline a little faster. That's my pitch.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think you are 100% correct. I've told people this, you know what? Nothing moves a congressman or a senator more than 1 or 2 letters. You think it requires 20 or 30? No, it doesn't. You get 2 letters that are intelligently written that describe the problem, offer up them solutions, explain to them what you're going to do to them if they don't help move this initiative forward. That gets them off their keister and gets them working towards trying to figure out how to get that thorn in the side out of my side. So please listen to what Bill's had to say. And Bill, I got to thank you, sir. Great insights. I want you back. I want you back. I want you back. I know my listeners want you back. So, sir, you take care of yourself. You take care of your family. Thank you for everything you said to us today. And thank you all for tuning in. And make sure, when you tune in to this podcast, go ahead and hit that little subscribe button down there. That helps us go so much further. And, recently we just, hit a milestone. I think we've got well over 50,000, subscribers and people who are now tuning in on a regular basis, understanding. And, we fortunately got selected as one of the top cannabis podcasts in the world a year ago. And, I'm looking to try to make sure we bring you that same kind of information this upcoming year. So, Bill, again, thank you so much, sir. Take care. Be well.
Thank you, Montel.
Yes, sir. All of you out there, make sure you keep tuning in. Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.